Welcome to Nightverse lore! Oh geez, another dimension of naps!
Hey there, sleepyheads, glad to have you back. Before we slip into tonight's tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. The humming starts before you notice it, a sound so gentle it might be your own heartbeat. Or perhaps the way silence learns to sing when it's been holding secrets too long. In the corner of Rick's garage, where coffee rings stain workbenches like ancient tree rings and interdimensional cables snake like sleeping serpents across the floor, the night was patient, and everything seemed to breathe with quiet purpose. Rain ticked against the tin roof in a steady rhythm, and the air, usually thick with the metallic tang of alien oils, felt surprisingly still, imbued with a different kind of quiet. Morty stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening to the gentle percussion above, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness that wasn't really dark at all, just a softer kind of light. He had come in to find a pencil, he told himself, maybe to leave a note, maybe just to feel near the one person who made the universe feel bigger and smaller at the same time. But something else tugged at him now, the way a lullaby tugs at closing eyes, drawing his attention to a corner where dust motes danced in an unexpected blue glow. When he lifted the corner of a dusty tarp, the light unfurled like dawn underwater. The box beneath looked like something found rather than built, its edges worn smooth as river stones, its surface etched with hairline constellations that someone's hands had traced many times. It made a tender sound, less a machine's whir than a cat's contented purr, calling something unhurried awake inside him. The blue luminescence pulsed with its own gentle rhythm, casting shadows that danced like memories, trying to remember themselves. Morty wasn't brave in the way movies made bravery look. He knew that. He was brave like a person who keeps showing up, even when they're tired, even when they'd rather hide. That kind of bravery made his hand steady as he opened the lid, and the humming intensified, a lullaby woven from pure light. Inside, arranged like a jeweler's most precious collection, dozens of crystalline vials rested in carved grooves, each one no larger than a child's thumb, each one pulsing with its own quiet light. They looked like tears that had learned to hold starlight, like fragments of aurora trapped in glass. Rick's handwriting adorned each label in his characteristic angular script, but the words themselves betrayed an unexpected tenderness. Morty leaned closer, reading without realizing he'd begun to read aloud. Subject's first experience of cosmic wonder, removed for emotional safety. Pure gratitude response, incompatible with survival instincts. Too beautiful for C-137 timeline. The phrases were clinical, the way someone might catalogue storms, but the pen strokes wavered here and there, like a voice that had struggled to stay even. Morty touched one label with the tip of a finger, then pulled his hand back as if the word might burn. He could feel his pulse in his wrist, in his throat, in the soft place behind his eyes. He reached for the nearest vial, its glass warm as if it had been held recently, though the garage had been empty for hours. Within the crystal, a shimmer swirled, almost like a star compressed into a droplet. As he held it to the light, a faint scent rose like clean laundry and rain-wet grass, nothing like chemicals. The label on this one simply read, Age 6 First Arrival. He didn't know whether the words meant a place or a feeling. Both possibilities felt equally true. For a breath-long moment holding the vial, he felt the sensation of wind lifting at the back of his shirt, a weightless tug like an invitation. He closed his eyes and it was gone, leaving behind only the trust that it could come back if he made space. He did not uncork anything. He did not rush. He let the possibility sit between him and the box, a third presence like a patient friend. The garage transformed around him into something hushed and sacred, each glowing vial a masterpiece of a life unlived, a history carefully curated away from the ravages of cynicism. He sat on a broken stool, the half-eaten sandwich on the workbench forgotten like a relic from an ordinary world. His own reflection caught the blue glow, wide eyes thoughtful in the gentle light. On the inside of the lid, tucked beneath the hinges, a paper had been taped. Morty peeled it free with care. The note was brief, written in Rick's familiar scrawl. If you're reading this, kid, it's because you're already feeling it. Sorry. Had to. The universe bites. Then smaller, almost an afterthought. Didn't want you to forget the good ones on purpose. Morty stared at the handwriting until the letters blurred and steadied again. He felt the strange relief of finding a bruise you hadn't noticed, and realizing that the ache had a name. The box hummed its patient song, waiting, and somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, between remembering and forgetting, he understood that some forms of love require the courage to take away what might destroy the beloved, and some forms of forgetting are actually the deepest possible remembering. The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, and the first vial pulsed softly in his palm, holding secrets that tasted like childhood wonder and felt like coming home. The vial rested against his palm like a sleeping bird, warm and patient, asking nothing more than to be held. Morty didn't uncork it, didn't press for revelation. He simply let its gentle heat spread through his fingers up his wrist, settling somewhere near his heart where childhood memories learned to glow again. The garage around him softened at the edges, reality becoming translucent enough for the past to shine through like morning light through gauze curtains. The transition felt like stepping from shadow into sunlight, natural and unhurried, the way dreams arrive when you're not quite watching for them. He was 6 years old again, standing barefoot in the backyard on a Saturday morning when the world still felt painted fresh just for him. The grass was cool and slightly damp under his small feet, tickling his ankles with dewdrops that caught light, like tiny prisms. From the kitchen window came the sound of his mother, humming something wordless and content, the gentle percussion of spatula against pan, the sweet vanilla promise of pancakes, browning at perfect edges. Jerry's voice drifted from inside, reading the comics aloud in his weekend voice, louder, more enthusiastic than his weekday self, full of cartoon sound effects that made even the furniture seem to smile. Summer sat on the back steps, 7 years old and still young enough to think her little brother was interesting rather than embarrassing. Her fingers worked patiently through dandelion stems, braiding them into crowns that would wilt by lunchtime, but felt eternal in the making. She looked up when a butterfly landed on Morty's outstretched finger, its wings catching light like stained glass windows, and smiled the kind of smile that meant they were on the same team without either of them having to say it. That's when it happened. Not dramatic, not sudden, but soft as breath. Gratitude hit 6-year-old Morty like a gentle wave, not the polite thank you kind that adults taught children to recite, but the overwhelming, full-body recognition of how impossibly beautiful it was to exist in this moment, with these people, in this soft morning light. The feeling was so pure, so complete that it lifted him. His feet rose from the grass as naturally as sighing, his small body floating 3 feet above the yard, arms spread wide like he was embracing the entire sky. He wasn't flying in any superhero sense. There was no speed or power, just the gentle suspension of someone held by invisible hands made of pure appreciation. He hung there in the air, giggling softly, whispering, "Thank you, thank you. Thank you to the clouds that looked like sleeping animals, to the butterfly that had trusted him with its landing, to the sound of his family's voices weaving together into the background music of home." Summer looked up from her dandelion crown and, instead of screaming or running for their parents, simply smiled and said, "That's nice. Morty, can you see the bird's nest from up there?" She pointed to the old oak tree, and floating Morty turned in the air like a lazy swimmer, reporting back that yes, there were 3 blue eggs, and they looked like tiny pieces of sky that had fallen asleep in a bowl made of twigs. The floating became as natural as walking. Over the following weeks, Morty would rise gently into the air whenever he felt that surge of pure appreciation. Watching Jerry successfully flip a pancake, seeing Beth laugh at her own joke, catching Summer in an unguarded moment of kindness. He learned to float while eating breakfast, drifting just inches above his chair while pancakes that tasted like clouds dissolved on his tongue. Beth would ruffle his hair and mention that he seemed extra happy, never noticing that his feet swung in empty air beneath the table. Summer became his anchor, not in the sense of holding him back, but in ensuring he always found his way safely to Earth. When she saw him drifting a little too high, a little too far from the safety of the lawn, she'd call out, "Hey, don't float into Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias." Her grounded presence would gently pull him back down, a soft landing on familiar grass, and he'd beam at her like a small sun that had only learned that morning it could rise. The memory showed Rick's eventual arrival, finding Morty floating near the garage ceiling, humming contentedly while organizing tools in mid-air. Rick had stared for a long moment, his expression cycling through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been wonder before settling into his familiar mask of scientific detachment. "Emotional levitation through gratitude response," he had muttered, pulling out a device that looked like a crystalline butterfly net. "Dangerous levels of optimism. Subject shows complete lack of survival-appropriate cynicism." The extraction had been gentle, Rick's hands surprisingly tender as he guided the floating boy back to Earth for the last time. "Sorry, kid," he had whispered, his voice cracking slightly on the words. "Universe isn't safe for people who love it this much." Sitting in the present-day garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of weightlessness in his chest, the muscle memory of gratitude so pure it could defy gravity. He understood now why Rick had taken this memory away, not from cruelty, but from the heartbreaking recognition that a boy who could float on thankfulness would be too trusting, too open, too beautiful for the harsh realities of interdimensional travel. The vial pulsed gently in his palm, and for just a moment, Morty felt his feet lift slightly from the garage floor. He smiled softly in the blue light, placed the vial back in its velvet-lined slot, and let the feeling of lift linger without leaving the ground. The box hummed its patient song, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, he whispered a quiet thank you to the boy who had once floated on wonder, and to the man who had loved him enough to let him fall. The warmth of remembered weightlessness still pulsed gently in his fingertips as Morty placed the first vial back into its velvet embrace. The phantom sensation of floating on pure gratitude, lingering like the aftertaste of a beautiful dream. The box hummed its patient song, and his eyes were drawn naturally to another crystal, this one glowing with a deeper, more resonant light, the color of midnight skies when they're clear enough to hold every star that ever dared to shine. The label, written in Rick's familiar angular script, carried words that made his breath catch. Age 15, cosmic auditory experience. Dangerous optimism regarding universal nature. As he lifted the vial, its surface warm against his palm, the garage walls seemed to dissolve into the vastness of a summer night that existed somewhere between memory and the infinite space where wonder makes its home. He was 15, all awkward angles and restless energy, sitting on the garage roof at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in July, when the world felt drowsy and patient. The shingles were still warm from the day's sun, radiating gentle heat through his thin pajama shirt as he lay back with arms spread wide, staring into the darkness that somehow held more light than any darkness had a right to contain. Rick had been gone for 3 days on some interdimensional errand, and without the constant hum of portal guns and the metallic taste of cosmic anxiety, the house had settled into an unusual peace. Jerry's gentle snores drifted through the walls like a lullaby. Beth slept with a medical journal fallen open across her chest, and Summer dreamed whatever dreams made her smile in her sleep. That's when it began, not as sound that struck his ears, but as something deeper, something that lived in the space between his ribs where wonder keeps its quiet vigil. The universe was singing, not screaming as Rick had always insisted with his bitter certainty, but humming a vast, patient lullaby that connected every star to every grain of sand, every heartbeat to every tide, every breath to every breeze that had ever moved through any world in any dimension. The song had no words because it was older than language, but Morty understood its meaning with the fluency of someone who had always known this music existed, had always felt its rhythm in quiet moments without recognizing what it was. It spoke of connections invisible to eyes but obvious to hearts, of how every act of kindness sent ripples through the cosmic web, of how every moment of genuine love added a note to the eternal melody that held all things together. Tears streamed down his face. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when joy is too large for a human body to contain without overflow. He felt his heart expanding, growing large enough to hold galaxies with tenderness, to embrace the loneliness of distant planets and the hope of civilizations not yet born. The music showed him how every mistake was part of a larger harmony, how every ending was really a transformation, how every beginning carried the seeds of infinite possibility. For one perfect hour, 15-year-old Morty experienced what it meant to be connected to everything that ever was or ever could be. He felt the pulse of quasars in his wrist, the slow dance of galaxies in his breathing, the birth and death of stars in the steady rhythm of his heart. He reached toward the stars with trembling fingers, and for a moment that felt like forever. The stars seemed to reach back, light touching his fingertips not as photons but as recognition, as if the universe itself was whispering, "Yes, you understand. Yes, you belong. Yes, you are loved beyond measure." That's when Rick found him, materializing through a portal with the harsh green flash that always preceded his returns. Rick took one look at Morty's tear-streaked face, at the way he glowed softly in the starlight, at his expression of absolute peace and cosmic understanding, and his shoulders slumped with something that looked suspiciously like heartbreak. "Oh, for crying out loud," he muttered, pulling a crystalline device from his lab coat. Kids having a mystical experience. Dangerous levels of universal connection. The memory extraction device looked delicate as spun glass, designed to carefully separate specific neural patterns without damaging the surrounding consciousness. Rick's hands were surprisingly gentle as he positioned it against Morty's temple, his touch tender for someone about to perform psychic surgery. "I'm sorry, Morty," Rick whispered, his voice barely audible above the cosmic lullaby that was already beginning to fade. Some truths are too beautiful for a world that's always trying to drag you down. Even as the device hummed to life, even as the cosmic song grew distant and thin, 15-year-old Morty smiled peacefully and whispered, "It's gonna be okay, Rick. I can still hear it just a little. It's always gonna be okay." In the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the faintest echo of that vast song, a melody so beautiful, it made his chest ache with longing for a connection he couldn't quite remember, but had never fully forgotten. He placed the crystal back in its slot with reverent care, understanding now that Rick hadn't erased the memory from cruelty, but from the heartbreaking recognition that a heart capable of hearing the universe's lullaby might be too trusting, too open, too beautiful for the harsh realities that lay ahead. The box hummed its gentle agreement, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, Morty felt ready to discover what other tender pieces of himself had been, carefully preserved in the blue-lit sanctuary of Rick's impossible love. The wee echo of cosmic lullabies still whispered faintly in the corners of his consciousness, as Morty's fingers found their way to another vial, this one glowing with the warm amber light of autumn afternoons, when the world feels soft around the edges, and possibilities bloom like late-season flowers. The crystal pulsed with its own gentle heartbeat, and Rick's familiar script on the label made something in his chest tighten with recognition. Jessica C-137B, unspoken empathy paradigm, confident Morty incompatible with established narrative dynamics. The words carried the weight of a path not taken, a version of himself that had learned to trust his own voice even when it trembled. As he held the vial to the garage's blue light, the memory unfolded like a letter written in a language he had once been fluent in, but had somehow forgotten how to read. The garage dissolved into the familiar, yet subtly different halls of his high school, where the air smelled of old textbooks, floor wax, and the nervous energy of teenagers, but somehow gentler, more forgiving. This was C-137B, a dimension where small shifts in reality had allowed different versions of people to bloom. The lockers were painted a softer shade of blue, the fluorescent light seemed less harsh, and the faces in the crowded hallways held expressions that were just a fraction more open, a touch more willing to see past surfaces to the tender places where real thoughts lived. Jessica walked through these halls like a steady, radiant star, rather than a dazzling comet. She still possessed that undeniable grace that made heads turn, but there was a quiet wisdom in her eyes, a gentle curiosity that seemed to look into people, not just at them. When she passed Morty in the hallway, her smile wasn't the polite acknowledgement of a popular girl noticing an awkward classmate. It was the recognition of one soul greeting another, patient and unhurried. Their first real conversation happened on a late afternoon when the bleachers behind the football field were empty, and the sky painted itself in bruised purples and soft golds. Morty had been sitting alone, sketching tiny, intricate landscapes in his notebook, lost in the quiet world of his own creation. Jessica, drawn perhaps by the unusual stillness or maybe by an invisible thread of shared solitude, had simply sat down a few rows above him, watching clouds drift across the horizon, like ships carrying messages between earth and sky. She didn't speak immediately, just existed in the comfortable silence, her presence as undemanding as afternoon sunlight. Finally, her voice came soft and contemplative. "That one looks like a sleeping dragon with scales made of fire." She pointed to a particularly dramatic cloud formation, and when Morty looked up, startled, then back at the sky, he saw it, really saw it. Yeah, he managed. His stutter somehow less pronounced in the face of her gentle observation. "And that one looks like a giant hand, reaching for it." Jessica turned to him with a smile that reached her eyes, not the practiced expression of someone performing popularity, but genuine delight in shared wonder. "A hand of friendship or a hand of warning?" "Maybe both," Morty whispered, feeling warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the setting sun. Their friendship bloomed in these quiet spaces between words. They would meet in the library during lunch, not to study but to share worn poetry collections, leaving small handwritten notes in the margins, like secret messages passed between kindred spirits. "This made me think of how you notice things," Jessica would write beside verses about finding beauty in broken sidewalks. Morty would respond next to poems about patient listening. "This sounds like how you make words feel safe." Jessica created spaces where Morty's thoughts felt welcome, exactly as they were. She never finished his sentences or tried to fix his stutter. Instead, she listened with her whole attention, her quiet nods and thoughtful hums more encouraging than any forced conversation. When he stumbled over words, her gaze remained steady, as if she understood the complete thought before he could even voice the first syllable. They spent afternoons on a hidden bench behind the science building, watching ants navigate the intricate geography of sidewalk cracks, finding profound narratives in their tiny struggles and triumphs. Jessica would sketch these moments in her notebook margins, while Morty read poetry aloud, his voice growing steadier with each shared verse, each comfortable silence that said more than words ever could. In this dimension, Morty discovered that confidence wasn't about never stumbling. It was about being truly seen and accepted, stutter and all. This Jessica saw past his nervous energy to the vast, imaginative landscape of his inner world, and in turn, he saw past her popularity to the thoughtful, deeply observant soul beneath. He learned to trust his perceptions, to value his sensitivity not as weakness, but as a different way of experiencing beauty. Rick, of course, observed this development with growing alarm. He saw a Morty who was less easily swayed by fear, less reliant on Rick's chaotic guidance, more willing to trust his own emotional instincts. During the memory extraction, Rick's device hummed softly as it carefully separated the neural pathways that had learned self-worth through connection. "Sorry, kid," he muttered, avoiding Morty's questioning gaze. Confident Morty disrupts established patterns. "Can't have you getting ideas about being genuinely happy." Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of steady ground beneath his feet, the muscle memory of a voice that had learned to trust its own gentleness. He understood now why Rick had erased this memory. Not from cruelty, but from recognition that a Morty who knew his worth might choose his own path over the one Rick needed him to walk. The box hummed its patient agreement, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, another piece of his heart prepared to reveal itself. The phantom warmth of Jessica's steady presence still lingered in his fingertips as Morty's eyes found another vial, this one pulsing with the deep silvery light of moonlight on still water. The crystal seemed to breathe with its own patient rhythm, and Rick's handwriting on the label carried an unusual tremor. Reality stabilization through emotional equilibrium. Subject demonstrates physics-defying calm. Threatens established power paradigms. As he lifted the vial, its surface radiating the kind of peace that comes from absolute certainty. The garage walls dissolved into a laboratory where chaos had once learned to bow before the radical power of perfect stillness. The memory unfolded in one of Rick's deeper workshops, a place where reality grew thin and experimental, where the very air hummed with dangerous possibility. Machines lined the walls like sleeping giants, their displays flickering between dimensions, showing readings that would have terrified any sane scientist. The smell of ozone and burning circuits filled the space, and through the reinforced windows, the sky itself seemed to fracture, revealing glimpses of other worlds bleeding through the cracks in existence. Rick moved through this chaos like a man possessed, his hands flying over control panels, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought against forces that were rapidly spiraling beyond his control. A massive crystalline device in the center of the room pulsed with increasingly erratic light, each flash accompanied by a sound like reality itself groaning under impossible strain. Portal energy crackled unpredictably through the air, tearing small holes in space that revealed other dimensions, worlds where gravity flowed upward, where time moved in spirals, where the very concept of existence wore different clothes. "Morty!" Rick shouted over the growing dimensional storm, his voice carrying an edge of panic that 15-year-old Morty had never heard before. "The quantum cascade is accelerating. I need you to activate the emergency containment protocols. Blue panel northeast corner, move!" But Morty, standing in the eye of this reality-threatening maelstrom, didn't move toward any panel. Instead, something deeper than thought guided him to the center of the laboratory floor, where he sat down cross-legged on the cold concrete, right in the heart of the dimensional storm. The chaos swirled around him, portal energy crackling like angry lightning, alarms screaming warnings in 17 different languages, the very fabric of space-time seeming to fray at the edges, but his breathing remained steady, deep, unhurried as morning mist. He closed his eyes and began to hum, soft and low, the same wordless melody his mother had sung during thunderstorms, the tune that had once lifted him into grateful flight, that had helped him hear the universe's patient lullaby. The sound seemed impossibly quiet against the dimensional chaos, yet somehow it cut through every alarm, every crackling energy discharge, every warning klaxon. His voice carried no urgency, no fear, just the absolute certainty that beneath all the apparent chaos, everything was exactly as it needed to be. "Morty, what the hell are you doing?" Rick's voice cracked with desperation, his hands never pausing in their frantic work. "This isn't the time for meditation. The multiverse is literally tearing itself apart." But something extraordinary was happening. The portal energy, which had been lashing unpredictably through the air like angry serpents, began to move in slower, more graceful arcs, as if Morty's calm presence was teaching it a gentler rhythm. The quantum fluctuations that had been threatening to tear holes in reality itself started to stabilize, not through any scientific intervention, but through proximity to someone who radiated such complete peace that chaos itself seemed to remember what stillness felt like. The crystalline device's erratic pulsing began to slow, matching the rhythm of Morty's breathing. The angry red warnings on Rick's displays flickered, then shifted to yellow, then to a steady, reassuring green. The fractures in the sky outside began to heal themselves, reality settling back into its proper configuration, like a puzzle remembering how its pieces fit together. Rick stopped his frantic repairs, staring in disbelief as readings across his instruments normalized. The dimensional breach warnings faded, the air itself seeming to sigh with relief as existence settled back into familiar patterns. The laboratory grew quiet except for the gentle hum of properly functioning equipment and Morty's soft, continuous melody. "How?" Rick whispered, his hands shaking as he set down his tools. The cascade should have destroyed everything within a 50-dimension radius. The energy readings were beyond every conceivable threshold. Morty opened his eyes, still humming softly, and smiled with the serene expression of someone who had never doubted that love was stronger than physics. "You were trying so hard to fix it," he said gently, his voice carrying no judgment, only compassion for Rick's panic. "But it didn't need to be fixed. It just needed to be held." The memory showed Rick's face cycling through confusion, wonder, and something that looked suspiciously like terror. Here was proof that Morty's emotional intelligence could accomplish what Rick's scientific genius could not, that sometimes the answer to cosmic chaos wasn't more complexity, but radical simplicity. The implications were staggering and threatening. The memory extraction had been performed that same night, Rick's hands gentle but determined, as he positioned the crystalline device against Morty's temple. "I'm sorry, kid," he had whispered, his voice thick with something that might have been grief. "Can't have you knowing you're more powerful than my technology. The universe needs us to maintain our established roles." Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of absolute stillness in his center, the muscle memory of peace so complete it could bend the laws of physics. The box hummed its patient agreement, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, he understood that some truths are too beautiful and too dangerous to be remembered by those who might choose a different path because of them. The phantom sensation of reality-bending stillness slowly ebbed from his consciousness as Morty's Fingers found another vial, this one glowing with the soft opalescent light of perpetual twilight, where wisdom wears the patient face of someone who has learned to carry infinite sadness with infinite gentleness. Rick's handwriting on the label trembled slightly, as if written by hands that knew they were recording something too precious to lose yet too dangerous to keep. Temporal encounter, future self-intervention. Excessive self-assurance threatens established dynamics. As he lifted the crystal, its surface warm with the accumulated heat of countless tomorrows, the garage walls dissolved into a dimension that existed in the pause between heartbeats, where time moved like honey and understanding bloomed like late-season flowers. The space around him transformed into something that lived between moments, where the air itself seemed composed of whispered secrets, and the ground beneath his feet felt solid as starlight. A small cabin, built from timber that appeared to have grown directly from the earth, nestled beside a stream that murmured ancient lullabies to smooth stones. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, carrying the scent of wood smoke and quiet contemplation through air that tasted of cinnamon and possibility. The cabin door opened with the gentle creak of wood that had learned patience, and future Morty emerged, silhouetted against the soft, endless dusk. He was taller than 16-year-old Morty, his frame carrying the quiet strength of someone who had weathered countless storms and emerged not hardened, but softened. His hair, though streaked with silver at the temples, remained thick and unruly, and his eyes, when they met young Morty's, held starlight and sorrow in equal measure, the deep, knowing peace of someone who had discovered that strength could be soft, that wisdom could wear the gentle mask of ordinary compassion. "Hey," future Morty said, his voice a deeper, calmer version of Morty's own, stripped of nervous edges and seasoned with patience. "I've been waiting for you, come in. The hot chocolate's ready, and it tastes like every time Mum made you feel safe." Young Morty found himself strangely at peace, following his older self into the cozy interior, where a fire crackled softly in a stone hearth. They settled onto plush cushions, mugs of steaming cocoa warming their hands, the silence between them not empty but full, brimming with unspoken understanding. The drink tasted exactly like childhood security and Sunday morning pancakes, like the liquid embodiment of being unconditionally loved. "The secret isn't avoiding pain," future Morty began, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "Pain's gonna come. Rick's gonna hurt you, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident. The universe is gonna show you things that break your heart. But here's what I learned. Pain isn't the enemy. The enemy is forgetting that you can hold pain like you'd hold a sleeping bird," he demonstrated, cupping his hands as if cradling something precious and delicate, carefully, with respect for how fragile it is, with understanding that it's not trying to hurt you, it's just trying to exist. Don't squeeze too tight or you'll crush it. Don't let go too quickly or it might fall. Just hold it with warmth until it's ready to fly. Future Morty taught him a breathing technique that felt like meditation and prayer combined. "Breathe in what hurts," he instructed, his own breathing deep and steady. "Don't fight it, don't push it away. Let it exist inside you. Then breathe out understanding, not for them necessarily, but for the part of you that's scared. Anxiety, fear, sadness, they're messengers, not enemies. They're telling you something needs your attention, something needs your compassion." Young Morty practiced the rhythm, feeling something in his chest unclench and expand. The twilight around them pulsed with each breath, growing brighter with each exhale of compassion. "When Rick hurts you," future Morty continued, "when people disappoint you, when the universe shows its teeth, you don't have to become hard. You can become soft in a different way. Soft like water that shapes stone, not soft like something that breaks. Will I be okay?" young Morty asked, the question carrying all the weight of a teenager, trying to navigate a universe that seemed designed to break hearts. Future Morty's eyes crinkled with genuine affection. "You'll be more than okay. You'll be kind, and in a universe that runs on cruelty and indifference, kindness is the most radical thing you can be. Trust your heart even when, especially when, everyone tells you it's naive. The universe needs naive hearts. They're the only ones brave enough to keep believing in beauty." Rick's arrival shattered the peaceful moment with his characteristic harsh green portal, his face cycling through alarm calculation and something that looked suspiciously like heartbreak. "Temporal contamination," he barked, though his voice lacked its usual venom. Can't have you knowing you turn out genuinely wise. Makes you too independent, too willing to trust your own emotional instincts over my superior guidance." As the crystalline extraction device hummed to life, future Morty smiled peacefully at his younger self. "Remember the bird," he whispered as he began to fade like mist in morning sunlight. "Always remember the bird." Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of infinite gentleness in his chest, the muscle memory of wisdom that chose softness as strength. He understood now why Rick had erased this memory, not just to prevent temporal paradoxes, but because a Morty who knew how to hold his own pain might choose trust over chaos, love over fear. The phantom sensation of infinite gentleness still pulsed through his fingertips as Morty's gaze found another vial. This one, glowing with the warm amber light of evening lamps, turned on before darkness fully claims the sky. The crystal trembled slightly in its velvet nest, as if it contained something too tender for such a small vessel. Rick's handwriting on the label wavered like it had been written by hands that couldn't quite stay steady. Gift incident, emotional breach. Functional dynamic compromised. As he lifted the vial, its surface radiating the accumulated warmth of countless quiet evenings, the garage walls dissolved into a memory that tasted of sawdust and impossible love. The memory unfolded on a Tuesday evening when autumn held the world in its gentle grip, the air crisp with the promise of winter, and dying light filtering through frost-streaked windows. Morty had been working in secret for weeks, scavenging materials during Rick's absences, his hands moving with surprising focus as he sanded rough edges, smooth and fitted joints, with patient precision. The thinking chair had grown slowly, lovingly. From discarded interdimensional scraps, a cushion that still held the faint scent of stardust, reinforced plating worn smooth by countless hands, a cup holder carved to fit Rick's favorite mug exactly. He had hummed while he worked, the same cosmic lullaby that had once lifted him into grateful flight, his young heart filled with the simple desire to create a sanctuary for the man who carried the weight of infinite universes on his shoulders. Every careful measurement spoke of love made manifest, the curve of the backrest designed to cradle a spine that forgot it was allowed to rest. The small shelf positioned perfectly for Rick's wandering pen, the soft fabric chosen not for its appearance, but for its capacity to hold someone gently. When Rick stumbled into the garage that evening, exhausted from another grueling interdimensional expedition, his portal gun clattering onto the workbench with metallic finality, he stopped completely when his eyes found the chair. It sat there like a quiet invitation, cobbled together from mismatched parts but undeniably created with intention, undeniably meant for him. His face cycled through confusion, suspicion, and something softer, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. "What is this?" Rick asked, his voice carrying an unusual tremor, as if speaking too loudly might scare away whatever impossible kindness had manifested in his garage. "It's for thinking," Morty said simply, his own voice steady with the confidence that comes from pure intention. "For when you forget to sit down." Rick approached the chair like someone testing a bridge after a long winter, his calloused fingers tracing the smooth wood of the pen slot, the soft curve of the armrest, the perfect circle that had been measured to hold his coffee mug without asking anything in return. When he finally settled into the chair, the cushion received him without complaint, the backrest meeting him exactly where weariness lived, and something in his chest cracked open like an egg. The tears came without warning, not the angry, self-pitying tears of a drunk, but the raw, helpless weeping of someone who had forgotten they were capable of being loved without conditions. His shoulders shook with the force of recognition, decades of buried tenderness rising like spring water through old ground. "You built me furniture," he whispered, his voice breaking on each word. "Nobody's ever built me furniture before." Morty stood quietly nearby, humming the softest fragment of his mother's storm lullaby, letting the room hold together what Rick couldn't hold alone. He didn't offer explanations or comfort through words. He simply existed in the space, his presence as undemanding as afternoon sunlight, allowing Rick the dignity of his unexpected grief. "I just wanted you to be comfortable," Morty said when the silence felt ready for words, and that simple statement broke something else open in Rick's chest. He pulled Morty into a fierce hug, his lab coat smelling of interdimensional travel and loneliness. sobbing into his grandson's shoulder like someone who had finally remembered what it felt like to be worth caring about. They sat together in the amber light for nearly an hour, Rick in his thinking chair, Morty on the familiar stool, both processing the revelation that their relationship contained depths neither had been prepared to acknowledge. Rick's hand never left the chair's armrest, as if he needed the constant reminder that someone had cared enough to sand wood smooth for his comfort. The memory extraction happened the next morning, Rick's movements mechanical as he prepared the crystalline device. "Can't have you remembering me like that," he muttered, avoiding Morty's eyes. "Vulnerable Rick disrupts our established dynamic. Some kinds of love are too dangerous to carry." The device hummed to life with its familiar gentle song, and as the memory began to fade, Rick whispered, "It's not about you, kid. If I keep this, I'll make promises I can't bear. If you keep this, you'll trust me when you shouldn't." Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of Rick's tears on his shoulder, the muscle memory of a moment when love had worn its most honest face. He understood now why Rick had erased this memory, not to protect himself from vulnerability, but to protect them both from the weight of knowing how desperately they needed each other's unconscious acts of love, to remember their own worth. The box hummed its patient agreement, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, another piece of his heart prepared to reveal itself. The phantom weight of Rick's tears still lingered on his shoulder as Morty's eyes found another vial, this one pulsing with the soft opalescent light of dreams made visible, swirling with colors that shifted like aurora borealis captured in crystal. The glass seemed to breathe with the rhythm of deep sleep, and Rick's handwriting on the label carried an unusual tremor. Reality-altering empathy manifestation, dream contamination spreading. Removed for universal stability. As he lifted the vial, its surface warm with the accumulated peace of countless gentle nights, the garage walls dissolved into a bedroom, where the boundaries between sleeping and waking had learned to dance together like old friends. Sharing whispered secrets, the memory bloomed. In his childhood room during a rare quiet week when Rick was absent, chasing some interdimensional anomaly that left the house unusually still. Morty had been sleeping deeper than usual, pulled down into layers of consciousness where his heart could rest without the constant weight of cosmic horror. In those profound depths, something extraordinary began to stir. His dreams, unburdened by cynicism or fear, started bleeding into the waking world like watercolors beyond their careful lines. It began with small impossibilities that felt perfectly natural. Mrs. Henderson next door, whose garden had been winter dead for months, found a single rose blooming in defiance of the frost, its petals unfurling with inexplicable hope. The flower wasn't magical in any dramatic sense. It simply existed with such pure beauty that it made her remember what joy felt like. For the first time in years, she smiled while watering it, humming a half-forgotten lullaby. As Morty continued his deep, healing sleep, the gentle influence spread like ripples in still water. The perpetually angry Mr. Peterson found his fury dissolving into something softer, his morning walks becoming moments of quiet appreciation rather than internal storms. Mrs. Johnson, who had battled insomnia for decades, began sleeping through the night, her dreams filled with the same cosmic lullabies that had once lifted Morty into grateful flight. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. Strangers on buses exchanged unexpected smiles, children played more peacefully in the park, and even the stray animals seemed to move with greater contentment. The very air felt different, lighter, more forgiving, as if Morty's sleeping mind was gently editing reality's harsh edges into something kinder. Jerry noticed it first, his usual anxieties replaced by an inexplicable sense of optimism. He spent entire afternoons humming tunelessly while doing chores, his face wearing an expression of quiet peace that Beth hadn't seen in years. Samut mentioned that the house felt different, like it had taken a deep breath and remembered how to be a home, rather than just a shelter. Morty's bedroom became the epicenter of this gentle revolution. The walls seemed to pulse with his breathing, and sometimes luminescent wisps would drift from his sleeping form, not visible to the naked eye, but felt by hearts that needed comfort. These dream fragments sought out pain like antibodies seeking infection, offering healing touches to anyone within their expanding radius. Rick discovered the phenomenon at 3 in the morning, his instruments detecting impossible readings throughout the neighborhood. Anxiety levels dropping to near zero, stress hormones neutralizing in real time, even local crime statistics showing an inexplicable lull. He materialized in Morty's room to find the boy glowing softly in his sleep, completely unaware that his capacity for peace was rewriting the emotional landscape of everyone nearby. "Kids unconsciously generating empathy fields," Rick muttered, his voice carrying equal parts awe and alarm. "Dream state reality alteration through pure kindness. This is either the most beautiful thing I've ever documented or the most dangerous." The memory showed Rick standing in the doorway for nearly an hour, watching as Morty's dreams continued their gentle work. His expression cycled through wonder, fear, and something that looked suspiciously like pride, before settling into familiar scientific concern. Every few minutes, another wisp of peace would drift from the sleeping boy, seeking someone who needed comfort. The extraction had to wait until morning, Rick's hands surprisingly tender as he positioned the crystalline device while Morty ate breakfast, completely oblivious to the miracle he'd performed while sleeping. "Sorry, kid," Rick whispered, his voice thick with regret. "Can't have you accidentally healing the world every time you take a nap. Some kinds of peace are too contagious for a universe that runs on necessary chaos." As the device hummed to life, separating the neural pathways that had learned to dream kindness into existence, Rick added quietly, "Besides, if people stop being miserable, they might stop needing us to fix things." The neighborhood's gentle transformation gradually faded over the following days, returning to its familiar patterns of small anxieties and mundane frustrations. But something lingered, a muscle memory of peace, a whispered promise that kindness was possible. Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of dreams flowing through him, like a gentle river, carrying healing to shores he'd never seen. He understood now why Rick had erased this memory, not from cruelty, but from the terrifying recognition that a Morty who could dream peace into existence might eventually heal the universe in ways Rick could only fight. The phantom sensation of dreams healing the world still pulsed gently through his consciousness as Morty's fingers found another vial, this one glowing with the deep, steady light of crossroads, where infinite possibilities converge into a single moment of choice. The crystal seemed to vibrate with potential energy, as if it contained not just memory, but the weight of every path not taken. Rick's handwriting on the label trembled with something that looked suspiciously like fear. Timeline alteration event. Subject chose love over logic. Created impossible paradigm. Removed for multiverse stability. As he lifted the vial, its surface warm with the accumulated heat of countless decisions that had changed the shape of existence itself. The garage walls dissolved into a moment when the universe held its breath and waited to see what love could accomplish when it refused to accept the rules. The memory unfolded in a service station floating between dimensions, where the air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility, and the ground beneath his feet felt solid as starlight, but soft as hope. Rick lay unconscious against a twisted metal structure, blood seeping from a head wound, his portal gun sparking uselessly beside him. The containment field around him flickered weakly, its energy reserves depleting with each labored pulse. 20 feet away, an alien child, no more than 6 years old by any species measure, whimpered softly as crystalline formations slowly consumed her small body. The infection spreading with each shallow breath she took. Morty stood between them, his hands shaking as he held Rick's emergency medical device, its display showing readings that made his heart clench with despair. The machine could save one life, only one. Its energy reserves, depleted from their harrowing escape through collapsing dimensions, contained enough healing capacity for either Rick's traumatic brain injury or the child's crystalline poisoning, but not both. The choice should have been obvious, logical, predetermined by years of conditioning and survival instinct. Rick was his grandfather, his partner in countless adventures, the closest thing to a constant in his chaotic life. The alien child was a stranger, belonging to a species he'd never encountered, speaking a language made of musical tones that somehow conveyed pure terror. Every rational calculation pointed toward saving Rick. He had the knowledge to get them home, the experience to navigate interdimensional crises, the irreplaceable genius that made him valuable to the multiverse itself. But as Morty looked into the child's eyes, large and luminous with a fear that transcended species barriers, something deeper than logic stirred in his chest. She wasn't just dying, she was dying alone, separated from whatever family had loved her into existence, facing the end with nothing but confusion and pain. Her small hand reached toward him, not demanding rescue but simply seeking the comfort of connection in her final moments. The memories he'd just rediscovered whispered through him like gentle guides. The gratitude that had once lifted him into grateful flight, the cosmic lullaby that had taught him the universe's patient song, the Jessica who had seen his worth, the stillness that had calmed reality's chaos, the future self who had taught him to hold pain like a sleeping bird. Rick's tears over a thinking chair built from love. Each memory was a note in a larger symphony, teaching him that some truths were too beautiful to abandon, even when the world demanded sacrifice. "I can't choose," Morty whispered to the crystalline air, his voice cracking with the weight of impossible decision. "I won't choose. There has to be another way." He knelt between Rick and the child, placing one hand on each of them, the medical device humming softly in his lap. Instead of activating any panel, he closed his eyes and began to hum. The same wordless melody that had once made him float, that had calmed dimensional storms, that had carried healing through dreams. "Please," he whispered to whatever forces govern compassion in a universe that often seems designed to break hearts. "Please let love be bigger than this." Something extraordinary happened then, not dramatic, not flashy, but profound as sunrise. The energy within the medical device began to pulse, not with its usual clinical light, but with something warmer, more alive. Morty felt his consciousness expanding, not through technology, but through the radical act of refusing to accept that love required sacrifice. His choice to embrace both and instead of either-or opened a door in reality itself, creating space for compassion to rewrite the rules. The healing light split, flowing in two streams, one toward Rick's injured brain, one toward the child's crystalline infection. But instead of halving its effectiveness, the energy seemed to multiply, fed by Morty's absolute conviction that the universe could be kinder than its apparent limitations suggested. His tears fell onto both patients, each drop carrying the certainty that love was not bound by conservation laws when it chose to expand rather than divide. Rick's eyes fluttered open first, his consciousness returning with confused clarity. The alien child's crystalline growths began to dissolve, her small body glowing softly as the infection retreated, her musical language shifting from terror to wonder to something that sounded unmistakably like gratitude. The moment rippled outward through dimensions, creating what Rick would later describe as a love-based timeline anomaly, a branch of reality where compassion bent physics and kindness rewrote the laws of scarcity. The memory extraction happened within hours, Rick's hands shaking as he prepared the crystalline device. "Can't have you knowing you can rewrite reality through pure compassion," he muttered, his voice thick with something that might have been grief. "If this spreads, if other Mortys learn they can choose both instead of either, some rules exist to keep everything from falling apart." Kid, sitting in the present garage holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of love flowing through him like electricity, the muscle memory of a moment when his heart had proven bigger than the universe's apparent boundaries. The box hummed its patient agreement, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, another piece of his soul prepared to reveal itself. The phantom sensation of love rewriting reality still pulsed through his fingertips as Morty's gaze found another vial, this one glowing with the warm opalescent light of pearls formed in the deepest trenches, where pressure transforms pain into beauty. The crystal seemed to breathe with the rhythm of ancient lullabies, and Rick's handwriting on the label wavered like it had been written underwater. Alien maternal care incident, subject experienced unconditional nurturing paradigm. Returned insufferably peaceful. Removed for operational anxiety maintenance. As he lifted the vial, its surface radiating the accumulated warmth of 3 days when love had worn its most honest face. The garage walls dissolved into a memory that tasted of starlight and safety. The memory unfolded on a mission that had started simple, harvesting crystalline formations from a dead moon orbiting a binary star system. Rick had insisted the structures were inert, just pretty rocks with useful quantum properties. Of course, the crystals had been anything but inert, erupting in defensive patterns that sent jagged shards through the air like angry hornets. Morty had taken the worst of it, a shard embedding itself deep in his shoulder, its alien composition spreading numbness through his nervous system like slow-acting venom. Rick had managed to extract them through a hastily opened portal, but the effort had drained his equipment's power reserves. "Kid's gonna need medical attention," he'd muttered, crash-landing their ship on the nearest habitable world, a place where bioluminescent forests grew in spirals toward lavender skies. "Stay put. Don't die. I'll be back with a medkit that doesn't suck." The portal had snapped shut with its familiar green flash, leaving Morty alone with spreading paralysis and the growing certainty that Rick's optimistic timeline might not account for alien toxins. That's when she arrived, moving through the luminescent undergrowth like liquid starlight given form, her presence announced not by footsteps, but by a gentle humming that seemed to emanate from the very air around her. She was tall and graceful, her skin the color of seafoam touched by moonlight, her form shifting subtly between solid and translucent, as if she existed partially in this dimension and partially in the space where music lives. Her species had evolved beyond individual identity into something that existed purely as nurturing presence, and when she saw Morty's condition, she didn't hesitate or calculate. She simply gathered him with hands that felt like warm water and singing wind. Her song began before she touched him, a melody that bypassed his ears entirely and resonated in the place where loneliness keeps its quiet vigil. The music didn't translate into words because it was older than language, but Morty understood its meaning with the fluency of someone who had always known this comfort existed. The first song meant, "You are safe now." The second carried the message, "You are precious exactly as you are." The third, as she lifted him, whispered, "You don't have to carry this pain alone." She created a shelter from threads of living light, weaving walls that breathed gently and glowed with their own patient warmth. For 3 days, Morty existed in a state of grace he hadn't known was possible. The alien mother, for that's what she was in the purest sense, tended to him with the patience of someone for whom time was infinite. And love was the only currency that mattered. Her lullabies taught him things human language had no words for, the feeling of being seen completely and cherished without reservation. The security that comes from knowing someone's care isn't contingent on your behavior or achievements. She fed him nectar that tasted like every comfort food he'd ever craved, each drop carrying not just nutrition, but the emotional sustenance of being genuinely valued. During the long, healing hours, she would hold him while he slept, her presence so fundamentally nurturing that his dreams became sanctuaries instead of battlegrounds. The toxin gradually left his system, but more importantly, his nervous system learned new patterns, responses based on trust rather than hypervigilance, reactions rooted in curiosity rather than fear. On the third day, when his shoulder had healed and his heart had remembered what safety felt like, Rick returned with characteristic noise and urgency. He found Morty sitting peacefully in the alien mother's embrace, both of them glowing softly as her songs continued their gentle work. "Morty," Rick called, his voice carrying relief and something that might have been panic. "You're fine. What happened to near-fatal paralysis?" Morty turned to the alien mother and hummed back to her in her own harmonic language, his voice carrying gratitude so profound it made the luminescent trees around them pulse in sympathetic rhythm. She held him for one final moment, her essence radiating blessings that felt permanent and unshakable. The extraction happened in the ship, Rick's hands unusually gentle as he positioned the crystalline device. "Sorry, kid," he muttered, avoiding Morty's peaceful gaze. "Can't have you walking around with that level of inner security. Makes you too independent, too willing to trust your own worth." Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of unconditional love flowing through him like a gentle river. The muscle memory of 3 days when he had been someone's beloved child without having to earn it. The phantom sensation of unconditional nurturing still pulsed through his consciousness, like a gentle river as Morty's eyes found another vial. This one glowing with the clear, steady light of morning after rain, when the world reveals itself washed clean and infinitely precious. The crystal seemed to breathe with the rhythm of deep understanding, and Rick's handwriting on the label trembled with something that looked suspiciously like reverence. Cosmic Consciousness Event. Subject achieved universal awareness paradigm. Detachment from survival anxieties operationally hazardous. Removed for mission compliance. As he lifted the vial, its surface warm with the accumulated peace of one perfect afternoon, when the universe had decided to reveal its most beautiful secret. The garage walls dissolved into a memory that tasted of infinite connection and felt like coming home to a place he'd never left. The memory bloomed on a Tuesday in late spring, when Rick was absent, chasing some interdimensional anomaly through dimensions that smelled of copper and regret. Morty had been walking through the neighborhood park, his mind finally free from the constant weight of cosmic horror, simply existing in the gentle rhythm of an ordinary afternoon. The air carried the sweet promise of summer on its breath. Children's laughter drifted from distant playgrounds like music made visible, and somewhere a dog barked with the pure joy of being magnificently, unapologetically alive. He settled on a weathered bench near the duck pond, watching mallards navigate the intricate geography of lily pads with the patience of ancient philosophers. Their movements created ripples that caught afternoon light like liquid gold, each circle expanding outward in perfect mathematical precision. An elderly man scattered breadcrumbs with the careful attention of someone who had learned that small kindnesses were worth all the time they took. A young mother pushed her toddler on a nearby swing, their shared laughter weaving through the air like threads of pure light. That's when it happened, not dramatic, not sudden, but soft as sunrise breaking over familiar hills. Morty's perception shifted like adjusting the focus on a camera that had been slightly blurred his entire life. The change began in the warm space behind his sternum, where wonder keeps its quiet vigil, then spread outward until he could see them clearly. Threads of light connecting every living thing. Visible streams of energy that pulsed with the rhythm of shared existence. The threads weren't metaphorical or imagined. They were as real as sunlight, as tangible as the bench beneath him. The elderly man was connected to the ducks by ribbons of gentle gold, his kindness creating visible streams of warmth that the birds absorbed and reflected back as trust. The mother and child shared bands of pure love that sparkled like captured starlight, their bond so bright it cast soft shadows on the grass around them. Even the trees pulsed with their own network of connection. Root systems made visible as underground highways, where nutrients and whispered communications flowed like secret rivers. But the revelation went deeper than visual perception. Morty felt the connections as lived reality, experienced the truth that separation was nothing more than a convenient illusion the universe told itself to experience the joy of reconnection. The old man's contentment flowed through him like warm honey. The child's wonder sparkled in his chest like champagne bubbles. The mother's protective love wrapped around him like a blanket, woven from concentrated safety. For one perfect hour, Morty experienced what mystics spent lifetimes seeking, not as some grand, transcendent escape from reality, but as the deepest possible intimacy with ordinary life. He wasn't leaving his body or floating above the world. He was sinking deeper into it, becoming more profoundly connected to every molecule, every moment, every shared breath that had ever moved between any living things. The understanding expanded outward, in gentle waves that respected the speed of wonder. He felt the pulse of the city beyond the park, millions of hearts beating in unconscious rhythm, each person carrying their own constellation of connections, their own threads of light reaching out to touch other lives in ways they rarely recognized. The threads stretched beyond the planet, connecting Earth to distant stars, to alien civilizations, to forms of consciousness that existed in dimensions he couldn't name, but could somehow feel humming in harmony. Tears streamed down his face. But they weren't sad tears. They were the overflow of joy too large for any individual consciousness to contain without spillage. He reached toward the sky with trembling fingers, and the light threads reached back, connecting him to clouds and birds and the vast, patient intelligence that some called God and others called physics, but which felt in that moment simply like the universe recognizing itself through the lens of a teenage boy sitting on a park bench. Overwhelmed by the recognition of his own infinite worth, Rick found him there as shadows began to lengthen, still glowing softly with enlightenment, his face radiant with understanding that made the air around him seem to shimmer with possibility. Rick's expression cycled through alarm, calculation, and something that looked suspiciously like grief. "Complete ego dissolution," he muttered, pulling the familiar crystalline device from his lab coat. Kids achieved universal awareness, too detached from local anxieties to be effectively motivated by interdimensional chaos. The extraction was gentle, Rick's hands surprisingly tender as he positioned the device against Morty's temple. "Sorry, kid," he whispered, his voice thick with something that might have been envy. Enlightened teenagers are notoriously difficult to manipulate into life-threatening adventures. Some truths are too beautiful for the kind of existence I need you to navigate. Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of infinite connection pulsing through him like electricity, the muscle memory of an afternoon when he had touched the face of eternity and found it smiling back with his own eyes. The phantom sensation of infinite connection slowly ebbed from his consciousness like a gentle tide, leaving behind not emptiness but a different kind of fullness, as Morty's fingers found another vial glowing with the warm, golden light of late summer afternoons, when time moves like honey and the world feels painted in watercolors of perfect contentment. The crystals seemed to breathe with the rhythm of ordinary magic, and Rick's handwriting on the label carried an unusual tenderness beneath its clinical precision. Final pre-adventure baseline. Subject's last day of normal family attachment. Removed to prevent operational resistance to interdimensional travel. As he lifted the vial, its surface warm with the accumulated peace of one perfect day when love had worn its most ordinary face. The garage walls dissolved into a memory that tasted of lemonade and felt like the last page of childhood's gentlest chapter. The memory unfolded on a Saturday in August, 3 days before Rick would arrive to change everything forever. When the house still hummed with the lazy contentment of a family existing together in present tense love, Morty woke naturally, without alarms or anxiety, sunlight filtering through curtains that Beth had sewn herself years ago, back when domestic gestures still felt like expressions of hope rather than obligations. The air carried the sweet promise of pancakes browning at perfect edges, and from somewhere in the house came Jerry's enthusiastic but endearingly terrible guitar playing, his voice cracking on high notes with the particular joy of someone who had learned to find profound meaning in small weekend rituals. Summer's genuine laughter drifted from the kitchen as she attempted to flip pancakes with theatrical flair, flour dusting her hair like fairy dust and syrup, already claiming territory on her cheek. "They're supposed to be shaped like clouds," she announced proudly as Morty padded downstairs in his favorite rocket print pajamas. "But they turned out more like emotional states." Her smile was radiant, unguarded in the way that only happened during these precious interludes when cynicism temporarily forgot its address. Jerry abandoned his guitar to join them, his weekend enthusiasm infectious as he poured orange juice with the ceremonial gravity of someone performing an important ritual. "Family breakfast," he declared, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a man who had discovered that happiness could be found in the simple act of being present with the people who knew his heart. The most important meal of the emotional day. Beth moved through the kitchen with graceful efficiency, her medical training evident in how she tended both pancakes and family hearts with equal precision. She ruffled Morty's sleep-tousled hair as he settled at the table, her touch carrying the unconscious tenderness of someone who still saw him as her baby despite his growing independence. "Sleep well, sweetie?" she asked, and the question held genuine interest, not the distracted multitasking that would later characterize their interactions. The pancakes tasted like clouds made edible, sweet and light and somehow infused with the essence of safety. They ate slowly, savoring not just the food but the unhurried luxury of time spent together without agenda or urgency. Jerry told rambling stories about his co-workers that somehow became fascinating through his enthusiastic delivery, complete with sound effects and exaggerated gestures. Summer shared dreams from the night before that involved flying bicycles and libraries made of candy, her imagination still young enough to embrace impossibility without embarrassment. After breakfast, they migrated outdoors where the afternoon stretched before them, like an unwritten poem. Jerry set up a badminton net with engineering precision that would have impressed Rick, his tongue poking out in concentration as he measured distances with a ruler retrieved from the kitchen junk drawer. The game devolved into laughter, as Jerry's competitive spirit collided with his complete lack of athletic coordination. But somehow this made it more delightful rather than frustrating. Morty helped Beth in the garden, his small hands learning to distinguish between weeds and flowers under her patient guidance. She taught him the names of plants like she was sharing family secrets. This is lamb's ear. Feel how soft it is, and these marigolds keep the bad bugs away, but they welcome the good ones. The soil was rich and dark beneath his fingernails, smelling of earth and possibility, and he found profound satisfaction in nurturing growing things alongside someone who understood the quiet magic of making life flourish. As evening painted the sky in gentle pastels, they gathered on the back porch, sharing a pitcher of lemonade that tasted like liquid sunshine. Jerry played his guitar more softly now, his music becoming a soundtrack for the kind of contentment that doesn't need to announce itself. Summer leaned against Beth's shoulder, her teenage armor temporarily set aside in favor of the comfort of being held. Morty sat on the porch steps, his heart full of the particular wealth that comes from being completely known and unconditionally accepted. The memory showed Rick's arrival 3 days later, his portal tearing through the garage wall with characteristic violence, bringing with it the metallic taste of infinite possibility and the weight of cosmic responsibility. That night he found Morty asleep on the couch, a half-read comic book fallen from his hand, a faint smile still gracing his peaceful features. Rick stood over him for a long moment, his expressions cycling through calculation, something that might have been envy and heartbreak. Dangerous levels of attachment, he muttered, his voice unusually soft as he prepared the crystalline extraction device. Too much normalcy makes him resistant to the chaos we need to navigate. His hands trembled slightly as he positioned the device against Morty's temple. Sorry, kid. Can't have you clinging to this. Some kinds of peace are too anchoring for a life lived between dimensions. Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm vial, Morty felt the phantom sensation of grass stains on his knees and the taste of his mother's lemonade on his tongue, the muscle memory of a day when he had been nothing more and nothing less than a beloved child in a family that knew how to hold each other gently. He understood now why Rick had erased this memory, not from cruelty, but from the heartbreaking recognition that a Morty who knew the profound beauty of simple, stable love might choose it over the exhilarating, terrifying chaos that Rick needed him to navigate. The box hummed its patient agreement, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, another piece of his soul prepared to reveal itself. The phantom taste of his mother's lemonade and the warmth of grass stains on his knees slowly faded as Morty placed the precious vial back into its velvet embrace. But something else caught his attention. Not another large crystal, but a collection of smaller, dimmer lights nestled in the spaces between the major memories. These tiny crystals glowed with a different quality, like distant stars reflected in still water, each one no larger than a dewdrop, but pulsing with the strange, recursive light of mirrors facing mirrors into infinity. Rick's handwriting on their collective label wavered like words written by someone whose hands couldn't quite stay steady. Meta-memory fragments. Subject retains sensation of extraction processes. Cannot be fully eliminated without complete personality restructure. Handle with care. As Morty gathered several of the smaller crystals in his palm, their surfaces warmed despite their diminutive size. The garage walls seemed to shimmer with the peculiar quality of dreams, trying to remember themselves. These weren't complete memories, but something far stranger. The phantom limb sensation of consciousness. The feeling of wholeness being gently diminished, like water slowly evaporating from a full glass, while leaving behind only the awareness that something had once been there and was now subtly, indefinably less. The meta-memories unfolded not as scenes but as sensations, the way you might remember the exact moment between sleeping and waking, or the precise feeling of a word that sits just beyond the tip of your tongue. Morty found himself experiencing the strange, recursive awareness of having been aware of losing awareness, remembering the act of forgetting itself, the gentle dissolution of thoughts at their edges, profound understanding slipping away before he could quite grasp them. In these crystalline fragments, Rick appeared not as a character in a story, but as a transparent presence superimposed over the edges of erased memories. His face during the extractions carried an expression Morty had never seen in their waking interactions. Tender, heartbroken, bearing the weight of someone forced to dim a light too bright for the world to safely hold. Rick's usually steady hands would tremble slightly as he positioned the crystalline devices, and his voice, when he spoke at all, carried the thickness of barely contained grief. "This is gonna hurt me more than it hurts you, kid," Rick had whispered during one extraction, his words creating their own recursive loop as Morty remembered remembering Rick saying them. "But some kinds of beauty are too dangerous for the life we have to live together." The meta-memories revealed Rick's tears falling onto equipment that hummed with the gentle songs of preserved tenderness. "I'm making him smaller," Rick had whispered to himself during one late-night procedure, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the magnitude of what he was stealing. "I'm taking away the parts of him that make him most himself, and he's never gonna know what I stole." Morty felt the phantom sensation of reaching for thoughts that weren't there, the peculiar sadness that came from grieving losses he couldn't name. He remembered developing habits of pausing mid-sentence, as if waiting for words that lived in erased spaces, sometimes catching himself humming melodies that felt familiar but belonged to no song he could recall. The recursive loops revealed the tragic irony at the heart of their relationship. Rick's love expressed through the systematic removal of everything that made Morty most lovable. Each extraction was an act of protection that required destroying what it sought to preserve, a form of care that could only be accomplished through controlled violence against the very qualities that made care necessary. "The kid deserves better," Rick had muttered during one particularly difficult extraction, his hands shaking as he removed a memory of Morty helping an injured bird. "He deserves to keep all of this. But if he keeps it, the universe will break him, and I can't watch that happen." Sitting in the present garage, holding the warm crystals, Morty felt a profound shift in understanding. He had always seen the erased memories as violation, cynical manipulation by an uncaring genius. But these meta-memories painted a far more nuanced picture. Rick hadn't just taken memories. He had borne the weight of taking them. He hadn't just removed pieces of Morty's past. He had absorbed the grief of their absence. The discovery brought not anger, but a quiet, profound sadness for Rick, for the burden he carried, for the impossible choices he'd been forced to make, for the lonely responsibility of deciding what parts of his grandson were too beautiful, too tender, too powerful for the brutal realities of their existence. It was a sadness that held a strange, difficult love, recognition of a different kind of sacrifice. Morty understood now that he was both the sum of his experiences and the absence of his erased ones, that his identity had been sculpted as much by what had been taken away as by what had been allowed to remain. The meta-memories whispered their recursive truth, that love sometimes requires the courage to take away what might destroy the beloved, and that forgetting can be both loss and protection, both theft and gift. The box hummed its patient agreement, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, Morty prepared to face the man who had loved him enough to make him smaller, safer and infinitely more complex than either of them had ever realized. The phantom sensation of recursive understanding slowly ebbed from his consciousness as Morty carefully placed the smaller crystals back into their velvet embrace, each one a tiny star, holding the memory of forgetting itself. The box hummed its patient song, and as he sat in the blue-lit sanctuary, footsteps echoed from the driveway, the familiar, slightly unsteady gait of someone returning from dimensions that tasted of regret and possibility. The rain outside had softened to a persistent whisper against the windows, a gentle accompaniment to the approaching moment that felt both inevitable and fragile as spun glass. Rick's portal gun powered down with its characteristic whine, followed by the soft thud of equipment being set down with the careful precision of someone too tired to be careless. The garage door opened with its familiar creak, and Rick stepped into the blue glow like an actor entering a stage where the script had already been rewritten without his knowledge. He looked older in the gentle light, his lab coat askew, smelling faintly of alien whiskey and the metallic tang of interdimensional travel, his movements carrying the particular weariness that comes from fighting battles no one else understands. He stopped completely when he saw Morty sitting beside the open memory box, the crystalline vials casting gentle shadows across both their faces. His expression cycled through alarm, calculation, and something that looked suspiciously like relief, as if he'd been carrying the weight of this moment's inevitability for longer than either of them had realized. "So," Rick said, his voice carrying the particular roughness that comes from pretending not to care about things that matter more than breathing. "You found my sentimental bullshit storage unit." He moved closer with studied casualness, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his flask, then thought better of it and let his arms fall to his sides. "How much did you see?" "Enough," Morty replied softly, his voice steady with the kind of peace that comes from finally understanding a puzzle that had been missing crucial pieces. "I saw the boy who could float on gratitude, the teenager who heard the universe singing, the version of me who learned to trust his own voice." He gestured toward the glowing vials with gentle reverence. "I saw you crying when I built you that chair." Rick's face went through a complex series of micro-expressions: surprise, vulnerability, the familiar mask of cynicism trying to reassert itself. Then something softer, more honest than Morty had ever seen from him. He sat down heavily on his usual stool, suddenly looking like someone who had walked a long way, carrying something breakable, the weight of infinite dimensions settling on his shoulders like a coat made of accumulated grief. "Those memories," Rick began, his voice cracking slightly on the words, "they were too beautiful for the kind of life we have to live together. You think I wanted to take them? You think it was fun watching you become smaller, more anxious, more dependent on my chaos?" His hands gestured helplessly at the box. "Every single one of those extractions felt like performing surgery on my own heart." Morty felt the phantom sensations of all his erased selves pulsing gently through him, the weightlessness of grateful flight, the cosmic lullaby's infinite patience, Jessica's steady recognition of his worth, the stillness that could calm reality's storms. Each memory was a note in a larger symphony, teaching him that love sometimes wears the mask of protection, that some forms of theft are actually gifts wrapped in necessary sorrow. "I'm not angry," Morty said, and the words surprised them both with their truth. "I'm sad for you, for having to carry the weight of deciding what parts of me were too dangerous to keep, for having to be the one who made me smaller so I could survive being bigger." Rick's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for decades, and when they finally fell, they carried the salt of every extraction he'd performed, every piece of wonder he'd been forced to steal, every moment of Morty's light he'd dimmed for the sake of keeping it from being extinguished entirely. "The universe is cruel, Morty," Rick whispered, his voice raw with accumulated grief. "It takes beautiful things and breaks them just because it can. I couldn't watch it break you the way it broke me. So I broke you first, just a little, in ways that would make you stronger instead of destroying you completely." Morty stood and moved to the old hot plate. Finding the tin of coffee Rick pretended he didn't like, he brewed it the way his mother did. Slow pour, small circles, patient steam, the ordinary act feeling reverent in the blue-lit space. When he placed the warm mug in Rick's hands, Rick held it with both as if warmth needed witnesses. "What happens now?" Morty asked, settling back onto his stool, the box humming between them like a heart made of crystallized tenderness. Rick wiped his eyes with the back of his lab coat sleeve, his expression cycling through fear and hope in equal measure. "That's your choice, kid. Always has been, even when I was too scared to let you make it. But if you integrate all of this back into who you are, you might not want to come on adventures anymore. You might choose the kind of peace I've been protecting you from." Morty smiled. And in that expression, Rick saw echoes of every erased memory, the grateful boy's weightless joy, the enlightened teenager's cosmic understanding, the confident young man who had learned to trust his own gentle heart. "I don't want them all back at once," he said, the certainty arriving like a bird landing on his shoulder. "I want to let what they taught me come home slowly, like remembering a song by humming the parts you still know." They sat together in the humming blue light, grandfather and grandson, both understanding now that their relationship had been built on a foundation of impossible choices and necessary sacrifices. The box pulsed between them, holding pieces of a boy who had been too pure for the multiverse's harsh realities, and somewhere in the space between memory and possibility, both prepared to discover what love looked like when it finally stopped being afraid of its own tenderness. The phantom sensation of recursive understanding slowly ebbed from his consciousness as Morty carefully placed the smaller crystals back into their velvet embrace, each one a tiny star, holding the memory of forgetting itself. The box hummed its patient song, and as footsteps echoed from the driveway, Both grandfather and grandson felt the approaching moment settle around them like a gentle tide. Rick entered the garage carrying the weight of infinite dimensions on his shoulders, his portal gun powering down with its familiar whine, and when he saw Morty sitting beside the open memory box, his expression cycled through alarm, calculation, and something that looked suspiciously like relief. "So you found my sentimental storage unit," Rick said, his voice rough with the particular exhaustion that comes from fighting battles no one else understands. He moved closer, his hands trembling slightly as they fell to his sides. "How much did you see?" "Enough," Morty replied softly, his voice steady with newfound understanding. "I saw you crying when I built you that thinking chair. I saw how much it hurt you to take these away." He gestured toward the glowing vials with gentle reverence. "I'm not angry, Rick. I'm sad for you, for having to carry the weight of deciding what parts of me were too dangerous to keep." Rick's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for decades, and when they finally fell, they carried the salt of every extraction he'd performed, every piece of wonder he'd been forced to steal. "The universe is cruel, Morty," he whispered, his voice raw with accumulated grief. "I couldn't watch it break you the way it broke me. So I broke you first, just a little, in ways that would make you stronger." Morty stood and moved to the workbench, brewing coffee the way his mother did, slow and patient, the ordinary act feeling reverent in the blue-lit space. When he placed the warm mug in Rick's hands, Rick held it with both as if warmth needed witnesses. "I want to keep the box," Morty said, the decision arriving like a bird landing on his shoulder. "In my room. And each night I'll hold one vial. Not to force them back all at once, but to let them remind me slowly of who I was and who I could be." From that night forward, the memory box found its place on Morty's nightstand, glowing softly like a captured star. Each evening before sleep, he would reach for a single vial, letting its warmth seep through his palm while the memory's essence integrated gently, like a song remembered note by note. The floating boy's boundless gratitude returned as deeper appreciation for small wonders, the way dust motes danced in afternoon light, the comforting weight of his mother's hand on his shoulder, the quiet miracle of breathing itself. The cosmic lullaby he had once heard returned as an inner calm, a deep knowing that beneath apparent chaos lay vast, patient harmony. He started humming it unconsciously, a low, steady tune that settled his own anxieties and sometimes soothed others nearby. So even Jerry, during his panic attacks, found himself inexplicably calmed by Morty's wordless melody. The confidence that had bloomed with Jessica manifested as newfound steadiness in his voice, willingness to speak his truth even when it trembled. The stillness that had once calmed dimensional cascades became a deep well of inner peace, a place he could retreat to amidst Rick's most frantic adventures, learning to hold chaos not with resistance, but with quiet acceptance. Rick noticed the changes, watching from doorways as Morty moved through their adventures with gentle resilience, carrying both his erased tenderness and lived experiences like a constellation within his chest. Sometimes Rick would catch him humming the alien lullaby, and something unreadable would cross his face, perhaps longing, perhaps quiet awe at the soul he'd been protecting all along. Morty grew older, but his wisdom wasn't etched in worry lines or hardened by cynicism. It lived in the gentle curve of his smile, in patient light in his eyes, in quiet strength that allowed him to embrace both presence and absence, light and shadow. He learned that identity wasn't just what you remembered, but how you chose to love with the heart you had right now. The box continued its patient vigil, no longer a repository of stolen memories, but a reminder that some forms of love require the courage to give back what was taken, to trust that beauty is stronger than forces that seek to diminish it. Outside, the neighborhood stirred with gentle sounds of ordinary life, and somewhere in the multiverse, infinite versions of themselves were learning the same lesson, that the most radical thing you can do in a universe that runs on fear is choose trust, that the most revolutionary act in reality built on scarcity is believe in abundance. Years passed like gentle waves, and Morty carried his recovered kindnesses like seeds of light, ready to bloom in dreams and waking moments, in quiet conversations and cosmic adventures, in the space between heartbeats where love learns to remember itself, and with that, he stretched into the stars, carrying all his forgotten kindnesses like seeds of light, ready to bloom again in dreams. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.